The Work Husband, a story of ambition, exploitation, and the power of knowing your worth. In every office, in every industry, in every city in the world, there is a version of this story playing out right now. A man who shows up early, stays late, produces the work, solves the problems, carries the team. And somewhere in that same office, there is someone else with a very different skill set. Not the skill of doing the work, but the skill of making sure everyone believes they did it. Joseph was the man who did the work. Trinity was the woman who made sure everyone believed she did it. For 3 years, Joseph covered for her, saved her, propped her up, gave her his ideas in meetings because she asked sweetly and smiled like she meant it, and he told himself it was partnership, told himself it was teamwork, told himself, in the particular way that men do when they are in love with someone who does not love them back, that it was just how things worked between them. It was not partnership, it was not teamwork, it was extraction. Quiet, deliberate, efficient extraction. And it went on until Joseph finally did something Trinity never saw coming. He stopped protecting her, and everything she had built on the back of his work came down. If you've ever been used by someone you trusted at work or anywhere else, like this video right now and subscribe so you never miss a story. This one is going to hit close to home for a lot of people. Let's get into it. But to understand how Joseph got to that point, to understand the moment he decided enough was enough, we need to go back to the beginning. To the day Trinity walked into Hartwell and Cross Financial Group and sat down at the desk directly opposite his. The new arrival. Joseph Mensa had been at Hartwell and Cross for 4 years when Trinity joined the firm. He was 31 years old, quietly brilliant, the kind of employee who made difficult things look easy and never made a fuss about it. His manager called him dependable. His colleagues called him the glue. His performance reviews were consistently excellent, and his salary was consistently average, because Joseph was the sort of man who believed that if he kept doing exceptional work, the recognition would eventually follow on its own. It had not yet followed. But he kept believing. Trinity arrived on a Monday in March. She was polished in the way that people who have studied Polish tend to be. Precise appearance, confident handshake, eye contact that held just a beat longer than necessary. She had come from a firm in Manchester. Good credentials, strong references, a reputation for results. She sat down across from Joseph, looked around the open-plan office with the calm assessment of someone running a calculation, and said, "You look like you know how everything works around here." Joseph laughed, told her he'd show her around. That was his first mistake. Not because it was wrong to be kind, but because Trinity read that kindness immediately and filed it away like a resource she'd found and intended to use. Within her first 2 weeks, she had identified who mattered in the office, who didn't, which meetings required performance, and which required actual knowledge. And she had identified Joseph as her most valuable asset. She just hadn't told him that yet. She started small, asked him to explain the firm's risk modeling process because, she said, with a self-deprecating smile, her last firm did it differently, and she didn't want to look foolish in front of the senior partners. Joseph walked her through it patiently, all of it, every nuance. 2 days later, in a meeting with senior management, Trinity presented a risk modeling suggestion that was almost word for word what Joseph had explained to her. The partners were impressed. Trinity was gracious about it in a vague way that implied collaboration without naming anyone specifically. Joseph heard about it from a colleague afterward. He felt something uncomfortable about it, something he couldn't quite name. But Trinity caught him in the corridor that afternoon and said, with that particular smile of hers, "I hope you don't mind. I borrowed your brain a little in there." He told her he didn't mind. He meant it at the time. The work-husband arrangement. It developed the way these things always do, gradually, then all at once. Trinity discovered 3 things about Joseph in the weeks that followed. First, that he was extraordinarily capable, the kind of mind that could see around corners in complex financial analysis. Second, that he was generous with that capability in a way that was almost reckless. And third, perhaps most useful to her, that he was in love with her. He had not said so. She had not asked. But Trinity was a woman who understood people, and specifically, she understood the particular way that a man like Joseph, principled, reserved, quietly hopeful, gives himself away. The extra second he took before looking away, the way he angled himself toward her in meetings without realizing it, the way he always made time for her, no matter what he had on. She did not love him back. She was married, had been for 2 years, to a man named Philip, who worked in construction and came home with dirt under his fingernails and didn't know what a banking merger was and didn't particularly need to. Trinity's marriage was a different compartment of her life, contained, separate. Joseph was a different kind of resource. The work-husband arrangement, as it quietly became, had no spoken rules. She would come to his desk with a problem, a client analysis, a compliance issue, a presentation that needed more substance, and he would help her. Always. She framed it as collaboration, used words like we in private and I in public. She told him he was the only one in the office who really understood her, that she could always count on him, that she didn't know what she'd do without him. Joseph heard those words and held on to them. He began staying late when she had deadlines, his own work finished, hers still in progress. He began reviewing her client reports before she submitted them, catching errors that would have cost her. He began, without fully acknowledging it to himself, running a shadow career alongside his real one, doing his job and doing significant portions of hers. Over the course of 2 years, Trinity received 2 promotions. Joseph received 1 commendation, a certificate in a frame that he put in a drawer because it felt hollow. He told himself she was going through the door first, and she'd pull him through behind her. That's how he understood it. That's what he needed to believe. Trinity had a very different understanding, but she wasn't going to be the one to clarify it. 3 years of invisible work. By the time Joseph reached year 3 of this arrangement, he had contributed to work that had generated 7 figures in client revenue for Hartwell and Cross, most of it attributed, in meetings and performance reviews and company communications, to Trinity. He had written the analytical framework behind a landmark pension fund restructuring that the senior partners still referenced in new business pitches. Trinity had presented it. His name appeared nowhere in the documentation. He had solved a compliance breach that would have triggered a regulatory investigation, working through an entire weekend, alone, communicating the resolution through Trinity, who relayed it to senior management, as though she had identified and fixed the problem herself. She sent him a gift card afterward, £50. He thought it was a joke, and then realized it wasn't. He had written the first draft of 4 separate client proposals that won new accounts worth millions in managed assets. In each case, Trinity presented the proposals. In each case, the credit landed with her. In each case, Joseph told himself it was fine because they were a team, and teams share credit. Except they weren't a team. Teams share credit in both directions. The feeling that had been building in Joseph's chest for months, that dull, grinding awareness that something was deeply wrong with how this worked, finally had a name the day he was passed over for Senior Analyst. The role went to Trinity. He found out in a company-wide email. He had not been consulted, had not been told in advance, had not been given any indication his candidacy was even under consideration, though he had quietly, carefully believed it was. He went to the bathroom and stood over the sink for a long time. Then he went back to his desk and opened his email and found one from Trinity, sent 4 minutes after the company-wide announcement. It said, "So excited about this new chapter. I'll need your support more than ever now. You're my rock, Jay." Joseph read it twice. Then he closed his laptop, picked up his jacket, and went for a walk around the block that lasted 45 minutes. When he came back, something had shifted in him. Something permanent. The decision. Joseph spent 2 weeks saying nothing and observing everything. He had always been analytical by nature. It was what made him good at his job. He applied that same precision now to the situation in front of him, watching Trinity, watching the office, watching the way credit moved and the way information flowed, and the way power actually operated at Hartwell and Cross. What he saw, once he made himself look clearly, was not flattering to anyone, including himself. Trinity had not built her career alone. She had built it specifically and deliberately on the foundation of his work. Every promotion, every commendation, every piece of internal capital she had accumulated in 3 years at this firm was supported by something Joseph had created, solved, or saved. He also saw that nobody knew it. Not the senior partners, not their direct manager, not the colleagues who had watched Trinity rise and assumed, reasonably, that her results reflected her abilities. He was invisible, deliberately so. Because Trinity understood, with an instinct so sharp it was almost impressive, that visible contributors become competitors, and she had no interest in competitors. Joseph made a decision. Not in anger. He was too controlled for anger to be the engine of it. He made it the way he made every significant decision. Quietly, carefully, with full knowledge of the consequences. He was going to stop covering for her. Not dramatically, not with a confrontation, not with an accusation. He was simply going to do his own work, only his own work, and let Trinity do hers. Without his framework, without his analysis, without his late nights and his careful edits and his quiet competence, propping up everything she presented. He chose his moment deliberately. The moment was the Aldridge Capital merger, the largest deal Hartwell and Cross had been appointed to handle in 6 years. 140 million in assets, a transaction that required flawless financial analysis, regulatory compliance across 3 jurisdictions, and a client presentation that had to be bulletproof. Trinity had been appointed lead on the Aldridge merger. She had celebrated in the office with champagne the partners had ordered. Joseph had smiled and raised his glass, and then he had gone home and made a very different kind of plan. The sabotage. Let us be precise about what Joseph did, and what he did not do. He did not fabricate numbers. He did not plant false information. He did not undermine the firm's client relationship or do anything that could be considered fraudulent. Joseph was, above all things, a man of integrity. And even now, in the calculated execution of this plan, his integrity held. What he did was this. He withdrew. When Trinity came to his desk 3 weeks before the Aldridge presentation, with the familiar look, the slightly overwhelmed look she deployed specifically for him, and said she needed his help stress-testing the valuation model. He looked up from his screen and said, pleasantly, "I've actually got a lot on at the moment. You'll want to run that through the analytics team." She stared at him for a moment. The look on her face was one he had never seen directed at him before, a flicker of something between surprise and recalculation. "I always run it through you," she said. "I know," he said, "but you're senior analyst now. You've got the resources." She went to the analytics team. The analytics team gave her what they always gave: competent, standard output. Solid work. Not the level of insight Joseph would have provided. Not the layer of analysis that caught the things standard output missed. The Aldridge valuation model had a flaw, a real one, buried in the assumptions around cross-jurisdictional tax treatment. It was the kind of flaw that Joseph would have found in 40 minutes with a cup of coffee. The analytics team didn't find it. Trinity didn't find it. The model went into the presentation with the flaw intact. The presentation to the Aldridge Capital Board was on a Thursday morning. Trinity delivered it confidently. She was good at the room, always had been. Poised, articulate, authoritative. She was 20 minutes in when the Aldridge CFO stopped her. He had found the flaw. The room went very quiet. The fall. The Aldridge CFO was a man named Gerald Osei, a former auditor, with the patience of geology and the precision of a scalpel. He did not raise his voice. He simply opened his copy of the document, turned to page 31, and asked Trinity to walk him through the tax treatment assumptions on the cross-jurisdictional holdings. Trinity could not do it. Not because she wasn't intelligent, she was, but because the framework behind that section of the analysis was Joseph's, built over 2 days of work she had not been present for, and she had not interrogated it deeply enough to defend it under expert questioning. She had presented it. She had not understood it. The distinction in that room was devastating. The Aldridge board asked for the presentation to be paused. They wanted the firm's senior partners present before they continued. The meeting was adjourned. Trinity walked out of that boardroom, having lost the room in a way that everyone present understood was not recoverable. The debrief at Hartwell and Cross that afternoon was, by all accounts, one of the most uncomfortable in the firm's recent history. The senior partners were not shouting. Men at that level rarely shout, but the silence they deployed was worse. They asked Trinity to take them through the analytical process behind the valuation model. She began explaining. The more she explained, the clearer it became that her understanding of her own presentation had limits she could not explain away. One of the partners asked directly, "Who built the underlying model?" Trinity hesitated, and in that hesitation, that single, fractional pause, 3 years of architecture collapsed. She said Joseph's name. The partner looked across the table. Joseph was in the room. He had been asked to attend as part of the deal team. The partner said, "Joseph, can you walk us through the model?" Joseph opened his laptop, and for the next 40 minutes he walked them through every layer of the analysis, including the flaw, its origin, and 3 possible ways to correct it. He was fluent, precise, and completely calm, because he had built it, every single piece of it. He knew it the way you only know something you have constructed with your own hands. Nobody in that room needed anything else explained. The reckoning. The formal review that followed took 10 days. The senior partners conducted it themselves, discreetly, the way firms prefer to handle internal failures when a major client relationship is at stake. They spoke to colleagues. They reviewed submitted work against system metadata. Who had opened which files, who had made which edits, who had saved which versions, and when. The digital trail that Trinity had never thought to worry about, because she had never imagined Joseph would stop protecting her. The picture that emerged was not ambiguous. Trinity was called into a meeting with the two founding partners on a Friday afternoon. She came in composed. She left having been told that her position as Senior Analyst was no longer tenable, that the firm would be providing a reference that reflected her actual independent contributions, and that they were parting ways effective immediately. She did not go quietly. She argued. She reframed. She deployed every version of the narrative she had been constructing for 3 years: the collaboration, the teamwork, the partnership. The partners listened without expression and then thanked her for her time. Security walked her to her desk to collect her things. Her keycard was deactivated before she reached the lift. Joseph was called in next. The partners offered him the Senior Analyst role. They also offered something the firm had never offered anyone at his level before: a review of his compensation going back 18 months, with adjustments to reflect what his actual contribution to the firm's revenue had been. He accepted both, quietly, without theatre. He walked back to his desk. Trinity's desk now sat empty across from him, and he sat down and opened his laptop and got back to work. He had a new client proposal to finish. This one had his name on it. Only his name. Trinity's last play. She called him 3 days after she was let go. He saw her name on the screen and answered because he had known this call was coming, and he preferred to have it over with. She started professionally, asked how he was, said she hoped there were no hard feelings, that she understood how things must have looked, but that she hoped he knew she had always valued him, that what they had built together was real. Joseph said, "What do you need, Trinity?" She pivoted, said she was applying for a role at another firm and could really use a reference, someone who knew the quality of her work, someone who had seen her at her best. Her voice was carefully calibrated, warm but not pleading, confident but not demanding. Joseph was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can speak to the work I observed you do independently. I want to be honest with you. I think you're a genuinely talented communicator, and you're strong in client-facing situations. Those are real skills. I'll say that honestly to anyone who asks." She understood immediately what he had not said: the analysis, the frameworks, the intellectual substance. He would not be vouching for any of it, because to vouch for it would be to confirm something that wasn't true. "After everything," she started. "Trinity," he said, not unkindly, "you're a smart woman. You'll figure it out." He ended the call. She called twice more over the following month. He answered the first time, and the conversation was shorter. He did not answer the second time. He did, eventually, write her a reference. 1 paragraph. Accurate in every word. Warm in its acknowledgement of the things she genuinely did well. Silent on everything else. It was, he thought, more than she had given him. He sent it without bitterness. Bitterness was a weight he had decided not to carry. What Joseph learned. Outro Plus, like and subscribe. Joseph Mensah was promoted to Associate Director 8 months after Trinity left Hartwell & Cross. He was 34 years old. His name was on the door of his own office, a small one with a window that looked out at the city, and on every piece of work that came from inside it. He thought about Trinity sometimes, not with anger, more with the particular clarity that comes after you have survived something that once confused you and now does not. He understood what had happened. He had allowed it. Not because he was foolish, he was anything but. He had allowed it because he was in love with a version of Trinity that he had constructed, and that version had never existed. He had been in love with who he hoped she was. And hope, when it is misdirected, is extraordinarily expensive. He had also learned something about visibility. The idea that exceptional work speaks for itself, that if you are good enough, long enough, the right people will notice, is a comfortable story that protects you from the discomfort of advocating for yourself. Joseph had believed that story for 4 years. He stopped believing it. He began putting his name on things, not aggressively, not in the manner of someone compensating for insecurity, but clearly, consistently, correctly. His analysis, his frameworks, his ideas in meetings. He made sure the senior partners knew what Joseph Mensah was contributing, because he had learned, at considerable cost, that if he didn't tell them, someone else would tell them something different. He never told the full story of Trinity publicly. He didn't need to. The people who needed to know already knew, and the people who didn't, well, they would find out one way or another. People like Trinity always show the seams eventually. He heard about a year later that she had taken a role at a smaller firm. He hoped she was doing well. He meant it, not in the way people say they mean things they don't actually mean, but genuinely. He had spent too much of the last 3 years thinking about Trinity. He was done. He had work to do. Important work. Work with his name on it. And every morning, when he walked into that office with the small window and sat down at his desk and opened his laptop and started, he thought about something his father had once told him. A man who builds things leaves something behind. A man who takes credit for things leaves only what other people will one day take back. Joseph had built things his entire career. He was just going to make sure, from now on, that everyone knew it. If Joseph's story resonated with you, like this video right now and subscribe so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below. How long do you think Joseph should have waited before he stopped covering for Trinity? Let's talk about it. See you in the next one.